Now, for passing the data of the API response to the tile component, we'll be using the concept of useState and useEffect. So these are React hooks which are used when we want to set the state variables. So what are state variables? Let us just assume that we have a component and in that we want to fetch the data, and maybe we want to fetch the data based on some value that we are submitting in a form. So you see the data will be refreshed for that particular variable, and it has to be remembered by this component or any other component in which the variable is available. So for that, we'll have to set the state of the variable. Whenever we want the component to remember some value or some information, at that time we'll be using the state variables. And how we will be setting the state variables? Using React hooks. One of them is useState. Over here, what we'll do is, first of all, we'll create a new file in the source folder. Let me just give it the name datatypes.ts. Let us define a new type using interface, and I'll be giving the name property listing. We already know what properties we want to define over here. They are the same as the columns that we had defined in the table. Property value, and then we can have property info. Let me take the ID as well. I'll just save it. Now, for the property listing state variable, we'll use useState. Property listing result, and then we'll have to set the property listing result. So basically this is the state and this is used to set the state using useState hook. Now what happens is we can simply mention the useState like this, but we always want to explicitly mention the data types so as to avoid any typecasting errors. Now we already have our type property listing, and what will happen is we will simply not just set it as property listing, it has to be an array of property listing because we are getting the result as an array. And over here I'm simply mentioning an empty array because this is where we can give the initial value of the state. So we'll be setting the state through this, but when we want to initially set some values, we can give it over here in useState function, and we are giving it as empty array. Now after this, what we'll do is we'll use the useEffect React hook. So this will be used to get the data from the dotnetcore API, and once we get the data, so you see that I have moved the fetch call from this function to the useEffect React hook. I'll just simply remove this function. We don't require it now. Okay, so I'm saving the changes and we'll go to the browser to check if we are making the call to the .NET Core Web API properly or not. On the console, we can see the response from the API, but if you notice over here that the call is going infinitely. So to avoid this, what we have to do is in useEffect React hook, we have to mention an empty array as a dependency over here. After this, I'll save the changes. We'll go to the browser again. I'll clear the console and reload the page. So the call is not going infinitely now, and this is what we expected as the response. So we are getting the response, but if you notice over here, I have done a console log of the data. What I'll do is I'll add another use effect and simply show you that this property listing result, if the response is getting saved here or not, if this particular state is getting set properly or not. I have mentioned property listing as the dependency over here, so the use effect should work as soon as the state changes. I'll remove the console log from here and save it once. We'll go to the browser again, clear the console, reload the page, and you see that the initial value of property listing result was empty because this is what we mentioned over here. But once we have got the response, over here we can see that property listing result is also set. Because if you notice over here, I have not done a console log of data now. I'm simply doing a console log of property listing result. So the state is getting properly set with the API response. And this particular use effect React hook I have only used to let you know that the state is getting properly set or not. There is no other use of this particular hook as of now in the application because we are getting the data from here only. Proceeding forward, what we'll do is we'll use this property listing result to set the tile component on the HTML. What I am doing is checking if this particular result have any data or not. So only if the length of this property listing result is greater than 0, what we want to do is we want to map and then iterate through the result. We'll take this tile component and as I have simply passed villa string over here, I want to use the result to pass the property type. Then rather than the static amount over here, I want to pass the result dot property value. Same goes for info. So basically what we have done is pass the result that we are getting from the API response into the tile component. We are not passing any static values now. And why we have implemented the map function is to iterate through all the records in the property listing result, because otherwise I have mentioned it 4 times, which should not be the case, because when we have an array we want to iterate through all the records without mentioning it a number of times. So if there are 10 records, I don't want to mention the tile component 10 times, right? And I would not know how many records are there in the database. We should simply map the result, iterate through all the records, and then render our HTML of the tile component. So this is what we have done over here. And in case we don't have any data, at that time what should happen? We want to simply use a conditional operator over here, and in case we don't find any data in the result, we want to simply show no results. I'll just do a format document and save the changes. Now after saving this, if we simply go to the browser and check if the data is getting rendered properly or not, what will happen is you'll observe that there is a warning on console that each child in a list should have a unique key. So it is this child that it is referring to, which is happening through the usage of map function. So for this, what we should do is we'll have to just simply install a dependency for UUID, and this is simply we are doing to generate a unique ID that can be passed as a key to each of the child from this map function. So I'll just simply mention the key over here, and what I want to do is use the UUID method that will generate a unique ID, and then it can be passed to the tile component as a key. So this we have done because this is a proper way of implementing a list when we want to render it as a HTML component. So after this, we'll just simply start the server again. The solution is running, so we'll go to the browser, and now if I just check and refresh the page, we're not getting any kind of warning because we have added the key for the child in the list. For each of the child in the list, there should be a unique key generated, and then that will be mapped to the particular child. After this, we'll simply close the console, and now if you notice over here, we're getting all of these tiles directly from the database table. All of this information is what we have inserted in the table for property listings, and that is what we got in the web API. After that, we have successfully made the connection from React to .NET Core web API as well, and it is getting directly mapped from table on the browser. So I hope all of you have understood the read operation that we have performed in this particular project.